Mazel tov again. As a relatively new parent, I've recently learned that perhaps the most excruciating pain there is to witness our children in pain. And we would do just about anything to alleviate the pain of our little ones. And I recently learned of a liberal synagogue community where just last year, 2 middle school students came out as trans, a brave and empowering act of self-awareness, of understanding of the self. And sadly, one of these teens was being relentlessly bullied by the other Hebrew school students. This is absolutely horrible. It's gut-sinkingly horrible to imagine a kid is being bullied simply because of who they are. And we like to believe that this sort of thing would never happen in a temple community, especially a reform community, which instills the values in our students, the values of acceptance, a passion for equal rights for all. However, bullying exists in just about every setting where there are school-aged children, and we simply hate the thought of this so much that we rarely speak about it. However, in this instance, unlike so many others, there is actually a happy ending, with some coaching from the temple staff and some resources from an incredible organization known as Keshet, an organization that we work with here at Holy Blossom. These teen bullies recognized how their behavior was affecting their classmates, and the 2 of them became staunch allies. They listened, they learned, they stretched themselves to become better, and the entire community was made stronger for it. Nelson Mandela, who in his life dealt with many bullies in one form or another, understood that people have the capacity for positive change. President Mandela writes, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, or their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes much more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." So let us pray that Nelson Mandela is correct. We Jews, as a historically hated people, and a people who currently face a global rise in anti-Semitism, we must ask, where exactly does hate begin? Is it natural, or is it hatred learned? Can someone actually be born with hate in their heart? And in Parshat Toldot, we read this week a puzzling text. After many years of struggling with infertility, Rebekah and Isaac conceived twins. However, it is written, "V'yitzrotzu habanim birkirbach." The children struggled together against one another within her. And this causes Rebekah to cry out to God in pain, "If it is so, why do I live?" She could not stand the thought of her children being born with hatred in their hearts, hating one another. And God then tells her that 2 nations are in her womb, and that the older child and his eventual nation will ultimately come to serve the younger. And the question that bothers me is, do the yet-to-be-born children, Jacob and Esau, know this as well? Do they know why they are fighting one another? Do they feel that predisposition of hatred towards one another? The great Torah scholar Rashi explains this struggle, writing that whenever Rebekah passed by the doors of Torah, the schools of Shem and Eber, Jacob moved convulsively in his effort to come to his birth. But whenever she passed by the gates of a pagan temple, Esau moved convulsively in efforts to come to his birth. And another explanation is that they struggled with one another and quarreled as to how they might divide the 2 worlds as their inheritances. Based on Rashi and the Midrashic sources that he relies upon to come to his conclusions, This interpretation does explain why there will be so much future hostility between Jacob's descendants, the nation of Israel, and Esau's descendants, the nation of Edom. It is captivating as a narrative, but I find myself hoping that Rashi is wrong. Why? Because if it is true, it means that we have a license to have hate in our hearts before we are even born. It means that the seeds of conflict can be laid in the womb. If this explanation is correct, it means that some are predestined, predetermined to hate. It gives credence to a truly upsetting, a truly backwards mentality that discriminating against another is not our fault because it is simply in our blood, part of our nature. It means that we cannot keep ourselves from hating because it is an intrinsic part of who we are. And this is exactly the wrong message. This is not a concept of humanity that I want to believe in or really be a part of. In this conundrum, I choose to believe in humanity as Nelson Mandela saw us. Our beliefs, our values, for good or for bad, are nurtured by our upbringing, our biases learned. And because we are human beings created by God, we are capable of change. We can seek teshuvah. Perhaps Nelson Mandela was not aware that he was teaching on the concept of teshuvah, but I believe this is exactly his message. Even if we are born into circumstances that normalize hatred, it is up to each individual to educate ourselves, to enlighten ourselves, to rid the hate from our hearts, and to learn to love our fellow as ourselves. However, if we turn back to the story of those teenage bullies, the unfortunate truth is most bullies do not reach a moment of moral clarity and change their ways. Very often, when called out, a bully will become more defensive, more predatory. Perhaps I should offer a bit of a trigger warning. Bullying is not an easy or fun conversation to have, but it is a necessary one. It is something that can start small and snowball into a significant, life-altering problem for not just one individual, but for the entire society. Bullying knows no age limits, and it is truly affecting our young people at an alarming rate. The pandemic's lockdowns have caused kids to feel intensely isolated and depressed. A 2021 research project conducted by Toronto's Sick Kid Hospital discovered that the mental health of 70% of this nation's youth is in the category of extremely fragile. And it is put forward that this is due largely to cyberbullying, a rapidly growing problem that is pushing vulnerable kids to really troubling and scary mental states. According to Bullying Canada, an organization founded 15 years ago to provide counseling and 24/7 support services, both online and over the phone, to Canada's youth, according to Bullying Canada, in 2020, they were contacted over 207,000 times. That is 40% more than any other year in their 15-year history. It's heartbreaking. Our children no longer feel free from bullies, even in the safety of their own homes. We see kids being publicly humiliated, emotionally tortured through text messages, through emails, and worst of all, on social media. When I grew up, I knew which kids to avoid in the cafeteria and at recess. Bullying was not something that I personally experienced, but I had friends that were relentlessly picked on, and I wish I had the strength then to stand up for my friends, for those that I did not even know. But now, bullies are not just a schoolyard issue. They are stalking their victims on Instagram and on Facebook. They cowered behind fake screen names and apps that allow teens to post on anonymous postings. They post soul-crushing, threatening messages online, in video games. Even new online educational platforms are brooding grounds for this behavior. And this is a problem that needs to be spoken about more regularly and addressed on a national level. We should make anti-bullying resources more readily available and have plans in place to know how to deal with this issue when it rears its ugly head in each and every community. I have reached out to a number of my rabbinic colleagues, suggested that they speak about bullying from their pulpits, from their positions of leadership in their communities. The data is staggering. 47% of Canadian parents report having a child victim to bullying. 60% of Canadian school-aged girls have experienced online cyberbullying this year, including abusive language, purposeful embarrassment, body shaming, and sexual harassment. That is 60%. And the rate of discrimination among students who identify in the LGBTQ community is 3 times higher than the heterosexual youth. Look, I am clearly very bothered by these numbers, but I want to impress upon you that this is much more pervasive to our society than even these numbers suggest. Research shows that bullying can leave an emotional, a physical, a psychological scar that can last a lifetime. It can leave children withdrawn, insecure, suffering from panic attacks and stomach aches and nightmares. Bullied kids often do poorly in school due to a loss of focus, a loss of confidence, and this can affect their futures. And when bullying is unrelenting, some children even have taken their own lives to escape their torture. It is unfathomably tragic, and it happens more than we care to talk about. Bullying has reached almost epidemic proportions here in Canada. A 2020 UNICEF Canada report noted that, in fact, Canada, the great country of Canada, has one of the highest rates of adolescent suicide in the world. And that is why it is crucially important that we make ourselves familiar with organizations like Stomp Out Bullying, the Trevor Project, and Bullying Canada. Organizations that train their volunteer responders to communicate with victims of bullying and their families, with the bullies themselves and their parents. Organizations that train school staff and Board of Education personnel, local social services, and clergy people. Organizations that truly can make a difference. This work is not only necessary for the children who are being bullied, but also for the bullies themselves. Many bullies are caught in a cycle beyond their control. They themselves are being bullied by a sibling, by a parent, by peers, and knowingly or not, they perpetuate this problem. Often the bullies who are never addressed or stopped as children then carry forward this behavior into adulthood and have higher chance of becoming sexual aggressors engaging in criminal activity. As a U.S. citizen, I know all too well the danger of allowing bullies to grow up and to run for public office. A helping hand, a word of guidance goes much further when we address the issue in youth. And as we look at Parshat Toldot, we see that the behavior of a bully need not define them for their entire lives. Let's look at Jacob, who takes advantage of his brother's hunger, his father's blindness. Jacob, with his mother's help, practices outrageous deceit on his helpless father and his unsophisticated brother, and he is rewarded for his deed. Are we to understand from this story that the Torah condones trickery and deceit? Of course not. What we can learn is that people can change. that Jacob, a bully in his youth, is not the same man in his old age. To come to this conclusion for himself, Jacob would have had to deal with a great amount of vulnerability, to deal with some self-embarrassment. We are not always proud of the actions we took as children and teenagers, but that does not mean that we are beholden to our past mistakes for all time. I want to close with the wisdom of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who teaches on the concept of teshuvah. Heschel writes that we are all failures. We should recognize it. I have failed so often, and I am sure that those present here have also failed. We have much to be contrite about. We have missed opportunities. And the sense of an inadequacy ought to be at the very center of teshuvah. To put contrition another way, develop a sense of embarrassment. It would be a great calamity for humanity if the sense of embarrassment disappeared, if everybody was an all-rightnik with an answer to every problem. We have no answer for our ultimate problems. We really don't know. And in this not knowing, in this sense of embarrassment, lies the key to opening the wells of creativity. Those who have no embarrassment remain sterile. And in doing this, we must confront both our successes and our failures as a society and make a true assessment of ourselves and our actions and the actions of our loved ones. And though it may be unsettling to face shortcomings, it is actually this head-to-head encounter that allows us to let go of guilt and instead embrace the positive change. I encourage you, if you or a loved one is experiencing bullying, I hope that you will please reach out. Reach out to your parents, reach out to your clergy, reach out to one of these organizations that can offer help. You are not alone and you are loved, and know that people can change for the better.